The Naturocrit Podcast.
What are you even talking about?
Welcome to, as that robot voice says, the Naturocrit Podcast, and thank you for boldly listening. What are we even talking about? Well, this podcast series is my take on naturopathic medicine, an area I've been studying for about 34 years, including my time in so-called scientific, non-sectarian naturopathic medical school. My approach is a pairing of scientific skepticism and a deep knowledge of naturopathy's intimate details. In previous episodes of this series, I established that naturopathy is essentially a kind of knowledge blending, misrepresentation, and irrationality. I have termed naturopathy both an epistemic conflation, falsely posing itself as an epistemic delineation, and the naturopathological. The science exterior is mixed with what is scientific. Then, that whole muddle is absurdly claimed to be science as an entire category, while particular sectarian science-ejected oath obligations and requirements are coded or camouflaged, therein effectively disguising naturopathy's system of beliefs in public view. Naturopathy's ultimate achievement is a profound erosion of scientific integrity and freedom of belief, packaged in the marketing veneers natural, holistic, integrative, and alternative, and improperly embedded in the academic category, science. Synopsis. In this Naturocrit Podcast, Episode 17, also known as Season 2, Episode 7, I'll cover a new 2026 study on the practices of Connecticut naturopaths, which I have titled, quote, a CSF Framework Evaluative Analysis of 107 licensed Connecticut naturopaths' practices in relation to science, ethics, commerce, and freedom, unquote. The four main parts of this episode are the 2026 study's polished report, the 2026 study's final report, follow-up questions as a formal section, and a rather long conclusion section. In this Part B, I'll cover the polished report after an overview of the entire study process, including data acquisition and exclusion criteria, and the Perplexity taskings upon the Connecticut NDs practice data. I will also cover a significant amount of interrogatives regarding a dominant mode of naturopathy activity as evidenced within the data set, naturopathy's root cause model, which, and this encapsulation is through a ChatGPT summary of the 2026 dataset, quote, appears repeatedly in practitioners' descriptions of their approach, operates as a central organizing principle of naturopathic practice in Connecticut clinics, justifies the use of specialty diagnostic testing, provides the rationale for treatment protocols, and serves as the primary distinction drawn by the NDs between naturopathy and conventional medicine, unquote. A new 2026 study, a CSF Framework Evaluative Analysis of 107 licensed Connecticut naturopaths' practices in relation to science, ethics, commerce, and freedom. Data acquisition. The study began by obtaining a list of State of Connecticut currently or actively licensed naturopaths from ct.gov. The list was acquired 2025/11/18 through screen captures from the address elicense.ct.gov/lookup/licenselookup.aspx. That resulted in a PDF of 33 pages with 12 names listed per page. The credential description on the output for each ND is, quote, Department of Public Health, naturopathic physician, unquote. Therein, endorsement or imprimatur, a docx table was created to organize the list and set up exclusion criteria. The original CT.gov output was alphabetized by first name, and that order was kept. The NDs were assigned a number letter designation, page number, and page row, so each page had each ND designated. For instance, for page 5, NDs 005A through 005L. Each practitioner was searched for via Google. The actively licensed NDs were excluded from the study if they were found to be practices located outside of the state of Connecticut, of which many were, often maintaining their Connecticut endorsement as cover in a not licensed for naturopathy state or jurisdiction, New York State, for example. Also, exclusion occurred if there wasn't much online, in the sense of an active practice, with a substantive amount of explanatory verbiage, or if the ND was an outlier in terms of role, as what I can best term issues or postures of attempted attention-seeking, vanity, celebrity, guru influencerness. This resulted, inevitably, in 107 naturopaths' practices within the state of Connecticut. That is the raw data that AILLM taskings occurred upon. Connecticut located active, publicly facing naturopaths' practice web pages with significant amounts of verbiage that explained the practice and its activities, aka what a patient would experience and what the public is exposed to. The dataset serves as a census of such Connecticut NDs since all 107 practices were used. I have uploaded a unified source document to archive.org as a PDF at archive.org/details/all_2026-0111. All outputs that will be discussed as follows have been anonymized in terms of the NDs and the practices involved. Perplexity tasking. Task 1 was applied to the raw practice data. This reads, for the attached docx by ND blank, quote, naturo, unquote, can you generate a report regarding how the contents, claims, and assurances compare with what is known in terms of modern medical science and ethics? Detail in a table the misuse of scientific language and any fanciful therapeutic and diagnostic ideas shared. Task 2 was applied to the results of Task 1 for each practice. This reads, the attached docx report evaluates a Connecticut licensed naturopath's claims and activities, apply the attached CSF docx framework, and specifically detail the harms in a tabular form that occur due to the Connecticut ND licensure law, Chapter 373 of Connecticut General Statutes, modernized by Public Act 14-231. Then all Task 1 results were collected into a single document, and Perplexity was instructed to create a submissible report. This I will term the polished report, and it is titled, quote, Connecticut Naturopathic Practitioners Comprehensive Science and Ethics Analysis Report, analysis of 107 practitioner reports, unquote. I think this is important because it is the most immediate extraction and evaluation of practice verbiage. Also, task number 2 results were consolidated into a single report as well. Both unified results from task 1 and task 2 were used to generate task 3. Task 3 is essentially the amalgamation of those two tasks. The tasking was, using the two attached amalgamated PDF reports, CTND Sci-Eth reports, and CT Practices CSF reports, create A detailed single report based upon the attached Cullen-Snyder Framework CSF PDF as applied to both. B, a constituted profile of the goals and values of the state of Connecticut as evidenced in the permissions and postures allowed, promoted, protected, platformed due to the results of A. This is titled, quote, Connecticut Naturopathic Licensure Analysis. Cullen-Snyder Framework applied to Chapter 373 and Public Act 14-231, unquote. This I will term the final report. Both reports will now be presented. Follow-up questions that I posed along the way during the above processes will also be included. The polished report, task number 1, amalgamated results. These are the joined results for task number 1 as achieved through Perplexity via the tasks, quote, can you combine the 107 science and ethics reports that comprise the attached PDF into one amalgamated results document? Please anonymize the naturopaths and their practices. Can you wrap up all your findings within a comprehensible PDF report that includes graphic visualizations and quantifications, unquote. So here is the task number 1 report, which I've been calling the polished report, that is formally titled, quote, Connecticut Naturopathic Practitioners Comprehensive Science and Ethics Analysis Report, Analysis of 107 Practitioner Reports, unquote. Quote, January 10th, 2026, to submit to the Connecticut Department of Public Health. Context, evidence-based analysis. A systematic, critical evaluation of marketing claims, diagnostic methods, and therapeutic assertions against current medical science and professional ethics standards. Executive summary. This report synthesizes findings from 107 individual science and ethics reports evaluating Connecticut licensed naturopathic physicians, identifying systematic patterns of problematic practices across 3 major categories of errors, 45 distinct finding categories, 107 practitioners analyzed, 96% with informed consent gaps. Major findings. Critical finding. While Connecticut's naturopathic licensing framework establishes minimum educational and examination standards, it does not prevent practitioners from operating outside evidence-based medicine and does not validate clinical claims. The regulatory system is self-regulated. Naturopaths control licensing boards, creating structural conflicts of interest. 3 categories of errors. 1. System errors, 15 distinct types, misuse of scientific language, and unvalidated diagnostic testing, false appropriation of evidence-based label despite promoting modalities without scientific support, appropriation of functional medicine terminology, root cause oversimplification, vitalistic language, vague physiological concepts, marketing advanced diagnostics for unvalidated tests, precision medicine appropriation. 2. Clinical errors, 16 distinct types, promotion of unsupported therapies and treatment of conditions beyond demonstrated scope. 8. Unsupported therapeutic modalities, homeopathy, craniosacral therapy, LDI, SOT, Maya abdominal therapy, Bach flowers, somatic release, blood type diet. 8. Serious conditions treated beyond evidence-based scope. 8 categories of unvalidated diagnostic testing. 3. Ethical violations, 14 distinct types. Scope overreach, financial conflicts of interest, informed consent failures, vulnerable population targeting. Financial conflicts of interest, 92% of reports. Marketing as primary care without prescriptive authority, 80%. Specialty claims without board certification, 69%. Targeting vulnerable populations, 76%. Absence of informed consent, 96%. Testimonial-based outcomes without objective measures, 83%. Vaccine discouragement, 6%. Scope creep, 74%. And there's a graphic provided as the distribution of 45 distinct finding types across 3 error categories. Next is the table, key quantitative findings. And this is a table of 4 columns, metric, value, percentage, and significance. Metric, total reports analyzed. Value 107%, 100%. Significance, Connecticut licensed naturopaths. Metric, absence of informed consent, value 103%, 96. Significance, no disclosure of unproven status. Metric, financial conflicts of interest, value 98%, 92. Significance, sell supplements / procedures ordered. Metric, testimonial-based outcomes, value 89%, 83. Significance, no objective outcome measurement. Metric, serious condition scope violations, value 89%, 83. Significance. Treat autoimmune/Lyme/fertility/etc. beyond scope. Metric. Marketing as primary care. Value 86%, 80. Significance. Despite legal prohibition in Connecticut. Metric. Targeting vulnerable populations. Value 81%, 76. Significance. Infertility, chronic disease, autism patients. Metric. Specialty claims without credentials. Value 74%, 69. Significance. No board certification in claim specialty. End of table. Cost structure. Initial visit cost, $400 to $500 for 60 to 90 minutes. Specialty panel tests, billed separately, often $300 to $800+ per panel. In-house supplements, marked up retail pricing. Procedures, HBOT, IV, high margin services sold direct. Another table titled Diagnostic Testing Patterns with 4 columns. Diagnostic test name, diagnostic test count, percent, and clinical validation. Diagnostic test, functional lab panels, count 67%, 63. Clinical validation, no evidence. Diagnostic test, IgG food sensitivity testing, count 52%, 49. Clinical validation, no evidence. Diagnostic test, hair analysis, heavy metals, count 45%, 42. Clinical validation weak. Diagnostic test, adrenal cortisol testing, count 41%, 41. Clinical validation weak. Diagnostic test, organic acid testing, count 33%, 31. Clinical validation, no evidence. Diagnostic test, neurotransmitter testing, count 35, percentage 33. Clinical validation, no evidence. Diagnostic test, SIBO breath testing, that's small intestine bacterial overgrowth, count 38%, 36. Clinical validation weak. Diagnostic test, DNA methylation testing, count 28%, 26. Clinical validation weak. That's the end of the table. These tests lack clinical validation but generate significant revenue and may result in unnecessary treatments, dietary restrictions, and patient anxiety. And there is a chart titled Problematic Diagnostic Tests Vary in Frequency with these tests shown and their prevalence in the reports. Unsupported therapies analysis. And this is a table titled Evidence-Free Modalities in Clinical Use. The table is 5 columns. Therapy, number of reports it occurs in, percent, evidence status, and key finding. Therapy homeopathy, number 89%, 83, evidence status, no evidence. Key finding, ultra dilutions beyond any molecules present. Cochrane reviews show no efficacy beyond placebo. Therapy, Bach flower remedies, number 69%, 63. Evidence status, no evidence. Key finding, no plausible mechanism. Systematic reviews find no effect above placebo. Therapy, low-dose immunotherapy, LDI, number 52%, 49. Evidence status, no evidence. Key finding, no large random controlled trials. Molecular mimicry target unproven. No evidence for autoimmunity or Lyme. Therapy, craniosacral therapy. Number 44%, 41. Evidence status, no evidence. Key finding, 2024 meta-analyses. No efficacy beyond placebo. Mechanism contradicts physiology. Therapy, somatic emotional release, number 31, percentage 29%, evidence status weak, key finding, conflates legitimate trauma therapy with unsupported mechanism claims, ancestral baggage concept not established. Therapy, supportive oligonucleotide therapy, SOT, number 28%, 26%, evidence status, highly experimental, key finding, one small study, no clinical outcome data, costs hundreds to thousands per treatment. Therapy, blood type diet, number 24%, 22. Evidence status, no evidence. Key finding, 2014 PLOS ONE study, benefits independent of blood type. 2013 systematic review found no evidence. Therapy, Maya abdominal therapy, number 19%, 18. Evidence status weak. Key finding, not in mainstream gynecology guidelines. Sparse evidence for infertility/endometriosis claims. Clinical risk. These therapies divert patients from evidence-based treatment and may delay diagnosis of serious underlying conditions. The combination of being promoted without informed consent creates ethical breach. Next is the chart. Homeopathy mentioned most in problematic therapy reports. Next is the chart. Evidence levels vary widely across health practices. Serious conditions treated beyond scope. This is a table of 5 columns. Condition, number, percent, scope, problem, harm, risk. Condition, autoimmune disease, number 71, percent 66, scope, problem. Requires disease-modifying immunosuppressive therapy, NDs cannot prescribe. Harm, risk, high, disease progression, organ damage. Condition, chronic Lyme disease, number 64%, 60. Scope, problem, extended unconventional treatments lack evidence, divert from guideline-based care. Harm risk, high, persistent/worsening infection. Condition, thyroid/endocrine disease, number 53%, 50. Scope, problem, requires hormone replacement, NDs cannot prescribe pharmaceuticals. Harm risk, high, inadequate hormone replacement. Condition, prenatal/fertility, number 48%, 45, scope, problem, requires ACOG/AAFP standards, serious complications need OB/GYN. Harm risk, high, missed pregnancy complications. Condition, autism spectrum disorder, number 42%, 39. Scope, problem, requires developmental pediatrics expertise. No evidence naturopathic treatment improves core features. Harm risk, moderate, delayed evidence-based interventions. Condition, cancer treatment support, number 39%, 36. Scope, problem, requires oncology coordination. Supplements may interact with chemotherapy. Harm risk, high, reduced chemotherapy adherence. Condition, PANS/PANDAS, number 21%, 20. Scope, problem, requires pediatric neurology/psychiatry expertise. Emerging condition needing specialist evaluation. Harm risk, moderate, misdiagnosis, missed treatment. Condition, serious infections, number 18%, 17. Scope, problem, some require antibiotics. Naturopathic botanical medicine cannot substitute. Harm risk, high, persistent/worsening infection. And the note on this table was 89 reports, 83%, document practitioners treating at least one serious condition beyond evidence-based scope. Next is a chart, serious conditions treated beyond scope by NDs. Ethical violations and professional standards breaches. 8 major ethical problems. Number 1, absence of informed consent. 103 reports, 96%. No documentation that treatments are experimental. Patients receive unproven modalities. Homeopathy, LDI, SOT, craniosacral therapy, without disclosure of evidence level or comparison to evidence-based alternatives, cannot make truly informed decisions. Number 2, financial conflicts of interest. 98 reports, 92%. Cash-only fees, $400 to $500 initial. In-house branded supplements with marked-up pricing. Direct sale of high-margin procedures. HBOT, IV infusions, red light therapy. Strong financial incentive to recommend testing and treatment without separation of diagnostic recommendation from financial benefit. Number 3, testimonial-based outcomes without objective measures. 89 reports, 83%. Marketing emphasizes subjective improvements, increased energy, better sleep, without defined baselines, objective measurements, biomarkers imaging, or exclusion of placebo effect and natural disease course. No way to distinguish true therapeutic effect from expectancy effect. Number 4, marketing as primary care without equivalent training. 86 reports, 80%, describe themselves as primary care doctors or primary health care practitioners despite Connecticut law explicitly prohibiting NDs from serving as primary care. Patients believe they are receiving equivalent care to MDs, medical doctors, delay establishing care with board-certified primary providers. Number 5, targeting vulnerable populations. 81 reports, 76%. Marketing specifically to infertility patients, chronic/incurable disease patients, such as autoimmune, chronic fatigue, Lyme, cancer patients, parents of children with autism, patients with serious mental health conditions. Vulnerability heightens susceptibility to optimistic but weakly evidenced claims. Number 6, specialty claims without board certification. 74 reports, 69%. Position themselves as specialists in neurology, psychiatry, reproductive endocrinology, or oncology without board certification or training equivalency. Patients seek specialized care from practitioners without relevant credentials. Serious diagnoses may be missed. Number 7, scope creep and professional boundary violation. 79 reports, 74%. Connecticut licensing defines specific scope, diagnosis, manual therapy, natural agents, nutrition counseling. Practitioners systematically exceed this, offering IV therapy, claiming expertise in conditions requiring specialist credentials, positioning as primary care when scope is adjunctive only. 8. Vaccine discouragement. 6 reports, 6%. Discourage influenza vaccination, position it as profit-driven, claim homeopathic nozos as superior or adequate alternative, violate duty of accurate risk communication, may increase preventable illness. Ethical framework problem. Connecticut's naturopathic licensing is self-regulated. Naturopaths control licensing boards, set continuing education standards, define standards of care within the profession. This structural arrangement creates incentive to approve scope expansion rather than restrict practice and creates conflict of interest in ethical oversight. And there's a chart, ethical violations and practitioner reports. Regulatory framework analysis. Connecticut's licensing context. Strengths of current framework. Requires graduation from CNME-accredited naturopathic medical schools. Requires passage of NPLEX. Objective competency examination. Specifies scope of practice in statute. Manual therapies, natural agents, nutrition counseling. Continuing education requirement, 15 hours per year. Critical gaps and structural issues. Self-regulation, conflict of interest. Naturopathic practitioners control their own licensing boards, set continuing education standards, define standards of care within profession. Create structural incentive to approve/expand scope rather than restrict. Lack of independent oversight. No prohibition on marketing as primary care despite legal limitation. Alternative labs, hair analysis, IgG testing, used clinically despite documented invalidity. No explicit requirement for informed consent about scope limitation versus MDs, medical doctors. No explicit red flags requiring referral. New cancer, severe infection, etc. Continuing education may be insufficient for rapid evidence evolution. Accreditation issues. CNME itself, characterized in medical literature as unreliable, suffering conflicts of interest. Curriculum includes content antithetical to established science. Homeopathy, unvalidated testing. NPLEX includes homeopathic remedies for pediatric emergencies. 2024 AMA Impact Statement concerns. The American Medical Association issued a formal statement, 2024, raising concerns about Connecticut's naturopathic scope expansion proposals, noting NDs lack training equivalency to MDs/DOs in diagnosis and disease management. Expanded scope could harm public through delayed evidence-based care, self-regulated profession insufficient to ensure patient safety. Insurance non-coverage of many ND services indicates lack of evidence-based validation. Public Act 14-231, effective October 2nd, 2014. Connecticut's naturopathic licensing statute defines scope, permitted, diagnosis, manual therapies, natural agents, herbs, supplements, vitamins, homeopathy, nutrition counseling, lab testing, phlebotomy, prohibited, pharmaceutical prescribing, medical exemptions, primary care practice, physical examinations. Recommendations for stakeholders. For healthcare regulators, Connecticut Department of Health. 1. Issue guidance restricting unvalidated diagnostic tests. Prohibit clinical use of hair analysis, IgG testing, and non-validated functional panels without high-quality evidence. Require disclosure of sensitivity/specificity and clinical utility for ordered tests. Establish testing standards aligned with evidence-based medicine. 2. Establish informed consent requirements. Require written consent forms clarifying ND scope versus MD, medical doctor scope. Mandate disclosure of experimental status for SOT, LDI, craniosacral therapy, homeopathy. Require explicit statement, quote, "This is complementary/alternative medicine, not primary medical care," unquote. Require acknowledgement of evidence level for each treatment. 3. Establish mandatory referral criteria. Require referral to MD, medical doctor, for new cancer diagnosis, severe infection, acute neurological symptoms, pregnancy complications, serious endocrine disease. Document referral attempts if patient refuses. Prohibit positioning as sole provider for serious medical conditions. 4. Restrict marketing claims. Prohibition on marketing as primary care provider or medical specialty without appropriate credentials. Requirement to specify Connecticut statutory scope limits in all marketing materials. Prohibition on specialty claims in areas requiring board certification, neurology, psychiatry, oncology, reproductive endocrinology. Truth in marketing requirements for therapeutic claims. 5. Strengthen continuing education standards. Increase from 15 to 30-plus hours a year. Require evidence evaluation training and critical appraisal skills. Include content on recognizing when to refer to evidence-based specialists. Require training on informed consent and ethical practice standards. 6. Address self-regulation conflicts of interest. Introduce independent oversight on naturopathic licensing board. Include MD/DO representation in scope of practice decisions. Separate profit interests from standard setting. Establish external review mechanism for marketing compliance. For naturopathic practitioners, evidence-based messaging. Promote only therapies with established efficacy. Move away from traditional concepts. Vitalism, body's healing power, detoxification, lacking scientific basis. Align with modern science. Scope clarity. Accept and publicize limitations. Position NDs as complementary to, not replacing, conventional medicine. Establish clear referral criteria to MDs, medical doctors, for serious conditions. Research prioritization. Commission rigorous RCTs for promoted modalities. Abandon unproven therapies until evidence emerges. Prioritize patient safety over professional financial interests. Conflicts of interest disclosure. Clearly disclose financial relationships to in-house supplements and procedures offered. Use independent laboratories for testing. Separate diagnostic authority from financial benefit. Informed consent standards. Provide written disclosure of evidence level for each proposed treatment. Document patient understanding of experimental versus established therapies. Recommendations for patients. When considering naturopathic care, 1. Ask for evidence. Request peer-reviewed research specific to your condition. Be skeptical of therapies with only testimonials or small studies. Ask, where is this published in a mainstream medical journal? 2. Understand evidence levels. Gold standard. Large randomized controlled trials in mainstream medical journals. Modest evidence. Some RCTs or meta-analyses showing small effects. Weak evidence. Small studies, observational data, or mixed results. No evidence. Theoretical only, or trials showing equivalence to placebo. 3. Seek primary care with board-certified provider for serious/complex conditions. Autoimmune disease, cancer, serious infection, neuropsychiatric conditions, infertility, pregnancy. NDs cannot prescribe medications required for these conditions. Demand referral criteria clarity. Ask your ND, what conditions require referral to an MD, medical doctor, and when will you recommend specialist evaluation? Request written answer. 5. Cost-benefit assessment. Weigh high out-of-pocket costs, $400 to $500 for initial visit, $300 to $800 plus for testing panels against proven alternatives. Ask if similar services are available through your MD, medical doctor, at lower cost. 6. Avoid delays in evidence-based diagnosis. Do not delay necessary medical testing, imaging, labs, specialty referral in favor of naturopathic assessment. For serious conditions, get diagnosis from board-certified specialists first. 7. Get second opinions. For serious diagnoses before committing to naturopathic protocols, ask a board-certified specialist if the naturopathic treatment plan is appropriate for your condition. 8. Verify credentials. Confirm naturopath graduated from CNME accredited school and passed NPLEX. Ask about mentors/trainers. Some may not have been evidence-based. Ask specifically about training in your condition of interest. Red flags. Practitioners who discourage conventional medicine or vaccination. Claims of curing serious chronic diseases. Refusal to coordinate with your MD, medical doctor. Extensive testing panels ordered immediately with no baseline. Promises of root cause removal for multifactorial diseases. Testimonials instead of objective outcome data. Resistance to referral for specialist evaluation. Key takeaway. Naturopathic licensure in Connecticut indicates a practitioner has received naturopathic training and passed an examination. It does not indicate that all clinical claims are evidence-based, scope is appropriate, or outcomes are validated. Treat naturopathic care as complement to, not replacement for, conventional medicine, and seek board-certified specialists for serious medical conditions. Conclusion. The 107 Science and Ethics reports reveal a Connecticut naturopathic profession operating along a spectrum from evidence-aligned to explicitly non-evidence-based. While some practitioners appropriately position naturopathy as complementary wellness support, numerous practitioners systematically misrepresent the evidence base for their claims, order unvalidated diagnostic tests, treat serious conditions beyond demonstrated scope, and create financial conflicts of interest. Why? Regulatory framework gaps matter. Connecticut's regulatory framework, while establishing minimum educational and examination standards, does not prevent these problematic practices because regulations are self-enforced by naturopaths themselves. Scope limitations are not actively policed in marketing materials. Alternative labs use clinically despite documented invalidity. Practitioners freely market beyond statutory scope with minimal consequence. Continuing education standards insufficient to keep pace with evidence evolution. No independent oversight separating profit interests from standards setting. Distribution of practitioners by risk profile. There is a chart, naturopathy practitioner practice patterns, and there is this table of 4 columns. Practice pattern, count, percent, and risk profile. Practice pattern, evidence-based naturopathy, count 28%, 26%. Risk profile. High claims evidence while promoting no evidence modalities. Practice pattern. Traditional naturopathy. Count 31%, 29%. Risk profile. Moderate. Transparent about alternative approach but uses unvalidated methods. Practice pattern. Integrative/functional medicine. Count 24%, 22%. Risk profile. Variable. Mix evidence-based with unvalidated variable transparency. Practice pattern. Specialty claims beyond scope. Count 18. Percentage 17. Risk profile. Critical. Serious scope violations. High targeting of vulnerable populations. Practice pattern. Vaccine discouraging. Count 6%, 6. Risk profile. Critical. Public health threat. The fundamental problem. Connecticut's naturopathic regulatory system operates under self-regulation with structural conflicts of interest. Naturopaths control their own licensing boards, set continuing education standards, and define standards of care within the profession. This creates institutional incentive to approve scope expansion rather than restrict practice and elevates profit motives over patient safety. Without independent oversight and evidence-based standards enforcement, patients remain vulnerable to misrepresentation of evidence base for clinical claims, inappropriate scope expansion into serious medical conditions, unvalidated diagnostic testing with financial conflicts of interest, absence of informed consent for experimental therapies, targeting of vulnerable populations, infertility, chronic disease, autism, delayed evidence-based diagnosis and treatment. Policy priority. The most critical regulatory need is independent oversight separating profit interests from standard setting and enforcing active compliance guidelines with marketing restrictions and informed consent requirements. Self-regulation alone has demonstrated insufficient to protect public safety in this analysis. Patient protection strategy. Until regulatory changes occur, patients seeking naturopathic care should maintain concurrent care with board-certified primary provider. Demand peer-reviewed evidence for specific claims. Understand evidence level limitations. Avoid delays in evidence-based diagnosis for serious conditions. Get specialist referrals for complex conditions. Be aware of financial conflicts of interest in recommendations. Request written informed consent about experimental status of treatments. Report completed January 10th, 2026. Analysis of 107 individual science and ethics reports evaluating Connecticut licensed naturopathic practitioners, all practitioners and practices, anonymized. Analysis focused on systematic patterns and findings aggregated by category, unquote. And that's the end of the compiled Task 1 results. Looking backward and looking forward. As I'd stated, in the, quote, science failing, CSF failing, and historical rejection tables for my CGA PHC testimony number 2, 2025-12-22, unquote, section from Part A of this episode, quote, external evaluation, the Cullen-Snyder framework analysis, and multiple external reviews affirm that Connecticut law creates high science camouflage, whereby non-scientific or pseudoscientific practices are cloaked in the language and regulatory protections of science. Practices that would be classed as professional misrepresentation or consumer fraud if offered by other healthcare professionals, e.g. MDs, medical doctors, nurses, pharmacists, are legally protected under the ND licensure system solely because statutory carve-outs define their standards independently, unquote. Naturopathy is, I think it is fair to say, regressive. Regressive is a term so polite that it doesn't seem to do justice to the context, of course. This question was asked of Perplexity at the end of all the writing and the interrogations that happened along the way in terms of the threads for this episode. So there's a little bit of flavor within of things yet to come in this episode. Quote, was the achievement of modernization regarding the legal permissions of licensed naturopaths as compared to the trajectory of all of the healthcare professions in Connecticut and broad consumer protection guardrails, a sum positive or negative in terms of rigor, social responsibility, and integrity, unquote. The answer, quote, it is a net negative in terms of rigor, social responsibility, and integrity. Rigor. The modernization expanded naturopaths from a narrow, low-risk advisory scope into diagnosis and physician-like practice without bringing their education, methods, or core doctrines up to Flexner-level scientific standards. Sidebar. Naturopathy is yet to meet the scientific standards of 1910. Close sidebar. Relative to other Connecticut health professions, which moved towards tighter evidence and accreditation, this reform lowered the average epistemic bar while enlarging the authority attached to a vitalist, principle-defined system. Social responsibility. Public messaging framed expansion as better access to care and primary care relief, but it placed more patients into a weaker standard of care under the same public health umbrella. Consumer protection guardrails, CUTPA, malpractice doctrines, DPH oversight were not strengthened in parallel, even though CAM ethics literature highlights special risks of misinformation, exploitation, and inequality in this sector. The result is more structural confusion and preventable harm risk, not a responsibly managed alternative. Integrity. Calling the scope expansion modernization is misleading branding. It aligned statutory language with what naturopaths were already doing, rather than aligning practice with modern evidence and medical norms. The push for prescriptive authority and primary care status leans on overstated claims of training and safety, out of step with independent assessments and with what evidence-based practice would demand for such privileges. Compared with the trajectory of other Connecticut health professions toward clearer standards, stronger transparency, and more honest signaling, this move erodes system-wide integrity by licensing a sectarian model to look like medicine. Taken together, the legal modernization of naturopathic permissions in Connecticut is best seen as a regulatory and rhetorical upgrade for naturopathy, but a downgrade for the overall system's rigor, social responsibility, and integrity, unquote. Of course it was misbranding. That is their brand. E.g., the NPLEX licensure exam clinical science section containing homeopathy. This report was basically from Connecticut naturopaths' own words. I thought this was an interesting follow-up to the above question, particularly in light of healthcare professionals as comparison. Quote, I'd like this thought experiment to be answered. Create a list of character flaws and needed transgressions a hypothetical generic healthcare person would have to possess and perform in order to match a typical Connecticut naturopath's professional/commerce/practice activities, unquote. The answer, which I think is rather Shakespearean tragic, quote, to match a typical Connecticut naturopath's documented practice patterns from your reports and broader context, a hypothetical generic healthcare professional would need to exhibit and act on these character flaws and transgressions. This is a stylized list grounded in the investigative findings. Character flaws, internal traits, self-deception, convincing oneself that metaphysical or low-evidence ideas, vital force, infinite dilution, universal toxins, are scientific despite basic biology/chemistry knowledge. Confirmation bias, systematically noticing only supportive anecdotes and dismissing contradictory data as reductionist or big pharma. Financial rationalization, seeing no ethical issue in selling low-evidence supplements/tests to one's own patients, framing it as empowering or holistic. Authority over evidence, believing one's training and title trump empirical disconfirmation of core modalities. Tribal loyalty, prioritizing guild/profession interests, scope expansion, board control, over public safety and public health norms. Fear of falsification, experiencing doctrinal challenge as personal attack, leading to defensive rhetoric rather than course correction. Empathy asymmetry, genuine care for patients suffering, but blind to harm from delay, false hope, or financial exploitation. Needed transgressions, actions, epistemic and professional. Routinely using unvalidated or discarded diagnostics, IgG panels, bioenergetic devices, adrenal saliva tests, and presenting them as reliable. Promoting homeopathy or other extreme dilutions as therapeutic despite chemical impossibility. Undermining vaccination or standard screening with selective or weak evidence. Cherry-picking or misrepresenting studies to support core beliefs while ignoring systematic reviews and mechanistic refutations. Equivocating on evidence-informed, claiming evidence-based practice adherence while insulating vitalist principles from it. Commercial and ethical. Selling supplements/devices in office with direct profit motive without clear evidence of superior efficacy or value, billing insurance/third parties for unproven modalities as if they were standard care. Failing to disclose conflicts of interest, e.g. financial stake in tests/supplements, or framing them as benign, delaying or diverting referrals to evidence-based care for serious conditions, oncology, autoimmune, infectious disease, in favor of low-evidence paths, regulatory and public-facing, leveraging physician title misleadingly to imply MD, medical doctor/DO parity in competence and training, lobbying for scope expansion, prescribing hospital privileges without addressing evidentiary gaps in core practice, serving on self-regulating boards that prioritize profession interests over public protection. misleading marketing, e.g. integrative primary care, functional medicine as superior, that blurs evidence boundaries. Patient interaction, offering false hope for chronic/terminal conditions via unproven root causes or detoxes without clear risk/benefit discussion. Exploiting vulnerability of chronic patients, autism parents, Lyme sufferers, with high-cost, low-yield interventions. Failing to obtain informed consent about evidentiary status, potential harms, or alternatives. In sum, sustaining a typical Connecticut naturopathic practice requires a combination of cognitive biases, ethical blind spots, and active boundary pushing that would get a mainstream medical doctor/DO sanctioned, sued, or ostracized, but which are normalized and protected within the naturopathic ecosystem, unquote. I did state in the second testimonies cover letter of 2025 that my impression of the governance of all of this is, quote, oversight, incompetence, unquote. There was also this follow-up to that follow-up. Quote, from what the reports have determined, is a naturopath worthy of trust, unquote. And the answer, in part, was, quote, the trust asymmetry, mainstream medicine, flawed humans, but anchored by rigorous evidence standards, external oversight, and institutional guardrails. You can trust the system even when individual doctors err. Naturopathy, per reports, flawed humans plus a doctrinal core that resists evidence, weak external checks, and commercial entanglement. Trusting the individual means trusting the entire unreliable apparatus. Bottom line, the reports show a pattern of practices that would disqualify a medical doctor from trust. Patients deserve better than hoping this particular naturopath bucks the systemic norm. Use them for low-stakes wellness coaching if desired, but anchor serious care elsewhere, unquote. I was interested in the angle of what is safe to share as information, then, within the Connecticut naturopathy context and the above characterized hypothetical naturopath. The answer, quote, contrast clarifies the difference. In typical medicine, guarded disclosure equals minor friction in a robust evidence-anchored system. In the hypothetical naturopath context, guarded disclosure equals essential protection against exploitation because care quality is heavily narrative-driven. Your story justifies their tests/supplements. The irony, mainstream medicine is safe enough to not need every detail, while the naturopathic model is risky enough to demand caution about sharing any, unquote. I also did this other hypothetical, speaking of looking forward, and in this instance to then look backward. I had ChatGPT, which I use later as an independent comparison to answers generated by Perplexity, particularly in Part C of this episode 17, answer this task. Quote, considering the past 150 years of advancements in science, medicine, public health, philosophy, and ethics, and what in sum these documents contain that were used herein, predict in a detailed manner what will be said about naturopathy in 60 years along those lines, unquote. 3 documents were used to inform the query. The final report, what I've termed a reverse-engineered document, and the World Naturopathic Federation materials from episode 15 in their raw form. The first 2 of those documents will be presented later in this episode, but this feels like the best place to share such a time-traveling, predictive yet reflective hypothetical. And here it is as an answer. Sidebar. A note on iridology. It is quite prevalent in global naturopathy, but has uniquely been purged from North American marketing language particularly. It shows up in this episode where the WNF materials are drawn from, therefore. Yet, within the 2026 Connecticut NDs practice data, iridology occurs within the language of 2 different ND practices. Due to its proportionality within that Connecticut material, Still, it was not tabulated or quantified in terms of the unverified or refuted close sidebar. Quote, here's a forward-looking, historically grounded prediction based on A, the last approximately 150 years of science/medicine/public health/ethics, and B, the internal structure and self-description captured in the materials we used, Connecticut Naturopathic Practice Marketing and Service Claims, which is the Connecticut ND practice data, your reverse-engineered and final report syntheses, yet to be detailed, and the WNF corpus, showing accreditation, integration of vitalism/holism, inclusion of modalities like homeopathy/iridology/pulse tongue diagnosis/detox therapies, and global professional consolidation strategies. That's the WNF raw material. I'm going to predict what mainstream scholarship, regulators, and ethicists would likely say around 2086, the year, assuming continued trajectories, more precise biomedicine, better causal inference, stronger standards for real-world evidence, and intensifying attention to misinformation and institutional trust. 1. Science and epistemology. What will be said? Quote, a case study in institutionalized epistemic pluralism that never resolved its core falsifiability problem, unquote. In 60 years, the dominant scientific verdict would likely be that naturopathy, as a profession, failed to reconcile two incompatible epistemic bases. Modern biomedical epistemology as testable causal models, mechanistic constraints, falsifiability, and outcomes adjudication with naturopathic doctrinal epistemology as vitalism/holism plus modality traditions, some of which are biologically implausible or non-validated, formally retained as identity anchors. Scholars will likely describe this as a mature example of credentialed epistemic pluralism, a licensed or accredited profession that co-located validated and non-validated knowledge under a unified credential. They'll point to the WNF accreditation comparison explicitly embedding vitalism and holism alongside biosciences and clinical medicine, and listing modalities including homeopathy and diagnostic systems like iridology and pulse/tongue diagnosis. Prediction. Future histories of medicine will treat naturopathy not as alternative medicine generically, but as a specific example of science-shaped language used to stabilize non-scientific commitments, a durable mixed epistemic system. 2. Medicine. What will be said? Quote, parts were absorbed, the profession was judged by what it refused to abandon, unquote. By 2086, medicine will almost certainly be even more individualized, algorithmically audited, safety governed, and decision support mediated. Against that backdrop, the medical commentary will likely split naturopathy into A, the absorbed components, B, the residual components, the reason the profession was criticized. The enduring critique will focus on what remained identity protective rather than evidence responsive. Homeopathy is a paradigmatic example. Diagnostic expansion zones rely on non-validated or weakly validated testing strategies, persistence of detox constructs as a clinical explanatory default, paradigm cases like chronic Lyme framing tied to specific testing, and experimental therapies in the Connecticut materials. Prediction. Future medical historians will say something like, quote, naturopathy's clinically valuable pieces were assimilated, while the profession's defining remainder was its retention of sectarian diagnostics and metaphysical theory under the cover of clinical licensure and accreditation, unquote. Sidebar. And ChatGPT adamantly asserts, from a quite long backward view and somewhat long forward view to the year 2086, 2086 regarding the latter, quote, what will almost certainly not be absorbed because these fail plausibility constraints or evidentiary replication thresholds, e.g. based on plausibility and 150 years plus of scientific trajectory, homeopathy, iridology, pulse/tongue diagnosis as diagnostic instruments, detoxification as a general disease construct, vitalism as a causal framework, adrenal fatigue as a diagnostic entity, non-validated chronic infection paradigms, unquote. Close sidebar. 3. Public health. What will be said? Quote, a trust and misinformation problem more than a modality problem, unquote. Public health writing in 2086 will likely treat naturopathy primarily as a systems problem. It operated in chronic illness markets with high uncertainty and high dissatisfaction. It created parallel explanatory frameworks that sometimes undermined shared public health baselines, especially in infectious disease and vaccine disputes, something the WNF book ecosystem indicates is present as a content domain in practitioner literature, even if not uniform across all NDs, and that's from the book lists within the WNF material. It contributed to overdiagnosis and overtreatment through diagnostic expansion and root cause narratives, a pattern visible in the Connecticut marketing emphasis on extensive testing and chronic Lyme pathways. By 2086, as health systems become more explicitly information governance systems, the critique will be less "this therapy doesn't work" and more institutional epistemic hygiene. How licensed systems keep boundaries clear between validated practice and speculative practice. Prediction. In public health ethics, naturopathy will be a recurring example in discussions of how professional licensure interacts with misinformation and risk externalization. Sidebar. A little bit on risk externalization and root cause. A. Risk externalization, to be clear in this context, means by way of ChatGPT, quote, the costs or harms of an activity are borne by parties other than the actor, unquote. A fancy word for victimization and exploitation. Because the state has sanctified naturopathic deception by fiat through licensure, neither the state nor naturopathy pays the price. Patients, consumers, the public, scientific integrity, the demarcation between practices based on belief and those based on the scientifically derived, and healthcare at large does. B. Root cause, then, now, and a comparison. I had stated in the synopsis of this episode part that, quote, root cause, unquote, in terms of the 2026 Connecticut ND practices material that I have curated, quote, appears repeatedly in practitioners' descriptions of their approach, operates as a central organizing principle of naturopathic practice in Connecticut clinics, justifies the use of specialty diagnostic testing, provides the rationale for treatment protocols, and serves as the primary distinction drawn by the NDs between naturopathy and conventional medicine, unquote. And later, as I went along, descriptions and determinations included the language, quote, system errors as misuse of scientific language and unvalidated diagnostic testing, including root cause oversimplification, red flags, including promises of root cause removal for multifactorial diseases, offering false hope for chronic/terminal conditions via unproven root causes or detoxes without clear risk/benefit discussion. Public health writing in 2086 will likely treat naturopathy primarily as a systems problem, including it contributed to overdiagnosis and overtreatment through diagnostic expansion and root cause narratives, unquote. The term, quote, root cause, unquote, occurs at least 217 times within the 526-page PDF. Incidentally, quote, vital force, unquote, occurs at least 20 times, quote, life force, unquote, at least 31 times, quote, chi, unquote, QI, at least 144 times, quote, medicatrix, unquote, at least 34 times, quote, homeopathy, unquote, at least 432 times, quote, homeopathic, unquote, at least 185 times, and, quote, science-based, unquote, at least 15 times, including, quote, science-based clinically validated medicine, unquote. Then, historically, by the way, in terms of reading naturopathy web pages in North America over the years, it is Canada for me that first comes to mind for the sloganeering of, quote, root cause, unquote, beyond the broad naturopathy principle ratified in 1989, which is, quote, tolle causam, treat the cause, unquote. A search of AANP and CAND regarding root cause as a, quote, concrete historical occurrence tied to a datable publication owned by a National Naturopathic Association, unquote, yields CAND's Vital Link, Winter-Spring 2008 Journal Edition. Vital Link was, quote, the professional journal of the Canadian Association of Naturopathic Doctors, CAND, unquote. It is currently named CAND Journal. There are 3 occurrences within the issue from an article on ADHD by NDs Seeley, Cooley, and Fritz. A 4th occurrence occurs in the issue's publication scheduling area, quote, upcoming themes, fall 2008, identifying the root cause of disease, unquote. That fall 2008 issue, whose theme was root cause, had these featured articles, quote, a TCM perspective on identifying the root cause of disease by Andy Kassim, the root cause of disease is never a symptom by Andy Lloyd, identifying the root cause of disease is not a destination, but a journey by Andy Mazuchin, unquote. And Canada being Canada, of those 3 ND authors, in terms of credentials, also listed are 3 science bachelor degrees and 1 master, in addition to their CCNM granted ND credential. Quote, root cause, unquote, or, quote, root causes, unquote, occurs within the issue's PDF at least 29 times. ND Lloyd would later head the WNF. In her article, she states, and this is a great example of the fusion of both naturopathy's essential vitalism and that root cause requirement, quote, naturopathic assessment model. The following is an assessment model that is designed to structure the assessment process and to aid practitioners in identifying the root cause of disease. This model is based on the understanding that the psychological, functional, and structural aspects of a person are never the cause of disease. They simply mirror and manifest the imbalances in the body. It also recognizes the vitalistic aspect of individuals and the presence of a vital or personal essence. The personal essence is a descriptive concept of an individual's vitality or life force. The collective life force or vital force is a common pool of subtle energy that connects everyone together and interconnects people to their environment. Personal essence refers to an individual's life force or vital energy, which comes from the collective life force, unquote. I'll detail that issue's root cause aspects in the comparison below. Now, for contemporary root cause details, I had ChatGPT do a synopsis on root cause by way of the 2026 Connecticut ND practices data set, apart from the Perplexity threads that constituted the reports and most preliminary tasks for this episode. This is that dataset overview. Quote, below is a structured synopsis of the root cause naturopathy approach as evidenced in the clinic materials. This synopsis focuses strictly on what is demonstrated in the document, the modes of reasoning, the promises made, and the recurring clinical cycle implied. Roman numeral 1. Core framing. Root cause as organizing principle. The document repeatedly emphasizes getting to the root cause. Ordering extensive lab tests, addressing underlying dysfunction rather than symptoms. The root cause model presented is: symptoms are downstream. Disease labels are incomplete explanations. Hidden dysfunction, immune, hormonal, toxic, genetic, metabolic, is upstream. Comprehensive testing reveals the true driver. Correcting the upstream imbalance resolves the condition. This framing is presented as a contrast to conventional medicine, which is implicitly characterized as symptom-focused. Roman numeral 2, modes of operation. The document evidences several operational modes. 1. Broad diagnostic expansion. The approach relies on specialty Lyme and co-infection panels, organic acid testing, amino acid testing, DNA methylation testing, neurotransmitter testing, adrenal stress index testing, autoimmune prognostic panels. These tests are positioned as tools for uncovering immune dysfunction, chronic infection, hormone imbalance, mitochondrial impairment, genetic susceptibility. Mode: expand diagnostic territory beyond conventional thresholds to reveal hidden pathology. 2. System imbalance narrative. The materials imply that many chronic conditions share immune dysregulation, gut dysfunction, inflammation, detox impairment, stress axis disturbance. This produces a cross-condition explanatory structure. Lyme, autoimmune disease, fatigue, anxiety, GI distress, etc. are linked to common upstream imbalance categories. Mode: treat multiple disease states as expressions of shared systemic terrain disturbance. 3. Therapeutic terrain restoration. The document lists modalities including low-dose immunotherapy, supportive oligonucleotide therapy for Lyme, IV nutrient therapy, craniosacral therapy, hyperbaric oxygen therapy, infrared sauna, homeopathy. These are framed not merely as symptom relievers, but as interventions that reset immune function, remove toxins, restore balance, stimulate healing. Mode: shift therapeutic goal from targeting discrete pathology to recalibrating the organism. Roman numeral 3. Promises embedded in the model. The document structure implies several promises. 1. Depth promise. Conventional medicine does not look deeply enough. Naturopathy will uncover hidden drivers. 2. Personalization promise. Testing will identify individualized imbalances, e.g. methylation, neurotransmitters. 3. Comprehensiveness promise. Multiple systems will be evaluated simultaneously. 4. Resolution promise. By addressing upstream dysfunction, chronic illness can improve or resolve. These promises are not always stated explicitly, but are structurally embedded in the diagnostic and therapeutic offerings. Roman numeral 4. The clinical cycle evidenced. From the materials, a repeating cycle is implied. Step 1. Symptom presentation. Patient presents with chronic or medically ambiguous symptoms. Step 2. Expansion. Extensive specialty labs are ordered to uncover root dysfunction. Step 3. Interpretation. Results interpreted within imbalance framework. Immune, adrenal, toxic, mitochondrial, genetic. Step 4. Protocol deployment. Combination of supplements, IV therapy, immune modulation, detox strategies, device-based therapies. Step 5. Monitoring. Repeat testing or ongoing optimization. Cycle character. Iterative, upstream focused, often multi-system. Roman numeral 5. Structural characteristics of the root cause approach in the document. 1. Upstream priority. Symptoms or secondary manifestations. 2. Hidden dysfunction assumption. Lack of diagnosis does not imply lack of cause. Rather, it implies insufficient depth of investigation. 3. Multi-system coupling. Conditions are linked via shared terrain dysfunction. 4. Laboratory centrality. Specialty lab panels function as discovery tools. 5. Immune-centric framing. Chronic Lyme and autoimmune themes are prominent. 6. Optimization orientation. The approach appears continuous rather than episodic, focused on recalibration rather than resolution alone. Roman numeral 6. What the document does not evidence. From the document alone, there is limited explicit probabilistic framing, e.g. sensitivity/specificity, false positives. There is limited discussion of negative predictive value or test limitations. The imbalance categories are presented as actionable findings rather than hypotheses requiring further external validation. This is descriptive, not accusatory. It reflects the narrative emphasis in the text. Roman numeral 7, condensed synopsis. The evidenced root cause naturopathy approach in the document is characterized by broad diagnostic expansion using specialty laboratory testing, systemic imbalance narratives linking diverse chronic conditions, immune and detox-centered explanatory frameworks, multimodal therapeutic protocols aimed at organism-wide recalibration, an iterative cycle of testing, intervention, and reassessment. It positions itself as deeper, more personalized, and more comprehensive than conventional medicine by redefining disease as downstream expression of hidden systemic dysfunction, unquote. Comparison of the 2026 PDF to the 2008 PDF. Here is a compare and contrast via ChatGPT. Quote, structural similarities. They share the rejection of symptom-only treatment, the claim that conventional medicine does not sufficiently address causation, a commitment to upstream thinking, the rhetorical centrality of root cause to naturopathic identity, structural differences. And this is a table of 3 columns. Dimension, 2026 document, vital link 2008. Dimension, nature of root cause. 2026 document, detectable biomedical dysfunction, vital link 2008, philosophical/constitutional imbalance. Dimension, emphasis, 2026 document, special testing, vital link 2008, principle of practice. Dimension, scope, 2026 document, clinical protocols, vital link 2008, professional doctrine. Dimension, tone, 2026 document, applied and patient-facing, vital link 2008, ideological and institutional. Dimension, causal model, 2026 document, lab-mediated mechanism, vital link 2008, vitalistic/systemic paradigm, larger interpretation. You can see an evolutionary layering. Vital link 2008 shows root cause as an expression of naturopathic philosophy and identity. The 2026 document shows root cause operationalized into test-driven clinical commerce. In short, the 2008 issue articulates the doctrine, the clinic materials implement it. Roman numeral 8, key distinction. The most important difference is this. In the vital link issue, root cause is primarily a principle of orientation. In the 2026 document, root cause becomes a diagnostic product category, unquote. Now, for emphasis, I want to be clear about the hijacking of, quote, root cause, unquote, in terms of naturopathy versus scientific medicine. I tasked ChatGPT with this, quote, can you encapsulate A, how root cause sits in terms of scientific rigor, and B, whether the accusation that conventional medicine is fundamentally defective is accurate, unquote. The answer, quote, A, where root cause sits in terms of scientific rigor. The phrase, root cause, itself is not unscientific. The issue is how it is operationalized. 1. In legitimate scientific medicine, modern biomedical science absolutely seeks upstream causation as etiology, microbial, genetic, toxic, autoimmune, pathophysiology, molecular pathways, signaling cascades, risk modeling, multifactorial causation, systems biology. Examples. Smoking leads to lung cancer. LDL elevation leads to atherosclerosis. H. pylori leads to peptic ulcer disease. BRCA mutation leads to cancer risk. In rigorous science, causes are probabilistic, not metaphysical. Causation is tested via reproducible evidence. Mechanisms are constrained by biology. Claims are falsifiable. Effect sizes are measured. Interventions are trial tested. In this framework, root cause means, and this is science, an upstream causal factor supported by controlled evidence and mechanistic plausibility. That is, scientifically coherent. 2. In the naturopathic root cause framing, as evidenced. The term is often used to denote hidden dysfunction not recognized by conventional thresholds. Lab-detected imbalance lacking strong validation. Terrain disturbance, immune toxic adrenal mitochondrial. Constitutional or energetic imbalance. Chronic infection constructs with contested diagnostic criteria. The differences, and this is a table of 2 columns, scientific etiology, naturopathic root cause as evidenced. Scientific etiology. Evidence precedes claim. Naturopathic root cause. Claim precedes evidence. Scientific etiology. Validated diagnostics. Naturopathic root cause. Often specialty, weakly validated panels. Scientific etiology. Defined causal pathway. Naturopathic root cause. Broad systemic imbalance narrative. Scientific etiology, probabilistic modeling. Naturopathic root cause, deterministic upstream narrative. Scientific etiology, limited scope. Naturopathic root cause, expansive multi-system explanation. Scientific rigor assessment. The naturopathic usage tends to conflate correlation with causation, use low specificity markers as explanatory anchors, expand diagnostic interpretation beyond validated thresholds, use upstream framing to justify multimodal interventions. That reduces scientific rigor relative to mainstream standards of causal inference. The problem is not upstream thinking. The problem is epistemic looseness in defining and validating causes. B is the accusation that conventional medicine is fundamentally defective accurate. This is a strong claim and must be evaluated carefully. The accusation usually takes the form, quote, conventional medicine treats symptoms, not causes, unquote. This is not accurate as a general statement. 1. Modern medicine structure. Modern medicine includes infectious disease eradication, vaccinology, oncology targeting molecular drivers, cardiovascular risk modeling, genetic screening, preventative medicine, public health interventions, behavioral medicine, lifestyle medicine, systems biology research. It explicitly aims at primary prevention, secondary prevention, tertiary prevention, mechanistic targeting. It is deeply cause-oriented. 2. Where the critique has partial validity, there are areas where acute care dominates reimbursement structures, chronic illness management is fragmented, time constraints reduce holistic exploration, social determinants are underaddressed, prevention is underfunded relative to treatment. Those are structural and economic limitations, not epistemological rejection of causation. Medicine is not fundamentally defective in its model of causality. It is imperfect in its delivery incentives. 3. Why the fundamentally defective narrative persists. It persists because chronic conditions are frustrating and complex. Patients often feel unheard. Reductionism can feel impersonal. System constraints produce gaps. Naturopathy fills that emotional and narrative gap by promising deeper inquiry, offering personalized explanations, framing illness as systemic imbalance. But that does not establish epistemic superiority. Condensed conclusions. A scientific rigor position of root cause. Seeking upstream causation is scientifically valid. Expanding causation beyond validated evidence reduces rigor. Naturopathic root cause often exceeds what evidence justifies. The term is used rhetorically more broadly than science supports. B. Is conventional medicine fundamentally defective? No, it is. Scientifically grounded in causal inference. Probabilistic and self-correcting. Evidence constrained. Imperfect in implementation. influenced by economic incentives, but not structurally anti-causal. Final distinction. Scientific medicine says we seek causes that can be demonstrated. Naturopathic rhetoric often says we know there is a deeper cause, even if it cannot be demonstrated conventionally. That is the dividing line, unquote. Now, in the sense just stated of, quote, naturopathic root cause often exceeds what evidence justifies, unquote, that statement therein directly accuses the naturopathy approach of violating a fundamental aspect of scientific operations, parsimony. So, as an encapsulation of root cause within the Connecticut ND practices dataset, ChatGPT offers this, and I do this for emphasis, quote, how naturopathic root cause often differs. The phrase root cause carries strong scientific legitimacy because it reflects genuine scientific reasoning. It aligns with modern systems biology and preventative medicine. It contrasts with purely symptomatic treatment. In many naturopathic frameworks, the phrase is used differently. When naturopathic discourse uses the same phrase but applies different epistemic standards, it can appear as a borrowing of scientific authority without adopting the corresponding methodological rigor. You think? Therein, typical features include interpretive attribution rather than experimentally demonstrated causation, reliance on weakly validated biomarkers or diagnostic constructs, expansive causal categories, toxins, terrain imbalance, vital force, energy flow, flexible explanations that accommodate multiple belief systems. In methodological terms, this frequently reflects correlational reasoning, narrative explanation, practitioner interpretation, rather than controlled causal inference. The causal claim is therefore often asserted rather than demonstrated. In that sense, it can reasonably be described as rhetorical borrowing, conceptual appropriation, or a misapplication of a legitimate scientific concept. The divergence occurs at the level of methodological rigor, the standards of evidence used to identify causes, the methods used to test those claims, not at the level of the aspiration to treat causes rather than symptoms, unquote. I am reminded of a term I used in my capstone, disoriented esotericism. In that sense, the AILLM stated in a comparison of root cause to my capstone's determination, quote, the root cause concept functions as a translation layer between public biomedical language and internal vitalistic or esoteric doctrine. The public narrative sounds biomedical, but the underlying framework can remain metaphysical. This is what the document, my capstone, describes as esoteric commitments hidden beneath scientific labeling, unquote. Close sidebar. For philosophy of medicine, what will be said, quote, a late survival of vitalist metaphors turned into literal clinical claims, unquote. Philosophers of medicine will likely write that naturopathy kept vitalist language alive long after biology moved on, and crucially did not treat it as merely metaphorical or poetic, but let it function as a causal, explanatory substrate in clinical contexts. The WNF corpus explicitly identifies vitalism as part of naturopathic philosophies. By 2086, philosophers will likely interpret this as a professionalized instance of a broader historical pattern. Romantic anti-industrial medicine persisted as cultural critique, but once institutionalized, it became a competing epistemic authority. Prediction: naturopathy will be discussed alongside 19th through 20th century, that is 1800s through 1900s, sectarian medicines as a professional fossil bed, preserving pre-biomedical explanatory structures in the age of systems biology. 5. Ethics. What will be said? Quote, the central ethical breach was not alternative choice, but epistemic disclosure, unquote. Ethicists in 2086 will likely focus on A. Informed consent as epistemic disclosure. The main ethical critique will be that many naturopathic practices rely on technical aesthetics, lab panels, genomics language, immune modulation framing, without clearly communicating evidentiary status, base rates, false positives, or lack of clinical utility. This maps directly to your science camouflage concern and the curricular conflation seen in WNF's accreditation grid and the Connecticut materials emphasis on extensive labs and chronic Lyme workups. B. The diagnosis to commerce pipeline. By 2086, bioethics literature will probably treat vertically integrated care models as a major risk category in all of medicine and cite naturopathy as an early clear example. Broad testing leading to interpretation, leading to supplements/infusions/devices, leading to monitoring loops. Your Connecticut practice analysis highlights that structure. Prediction. The ethical consensus will be that naturopathy's distinctive ethical vulnerability was epistemic asymmetry plus financial reinforcement, not merely being alternative. 6. Regulation and governance. What will be said? Quote, either delicensed, rescoped, or split into two professions, unquote. 60 years from now, governance pathways likely converge toward one of these end states or hybrids. Path 1. Rescoped naturopathy, evidence-tiered scope. Licensure retained, but scope tied to explicit evidence tiers. Required disclosures for non-validated diagnostics and modalities, stronger separation of wellness coaching from disease diagnosis. Path 2. Absorption and fragmentation. Evidence-consistent components absorbed into mainstream allied health, remaining doctrinal components relegated to unlicensed wellness markets or explicitly labeled traditional/spiritual services. Path 3. Schism model. A reformed, evidence-aligned ND track versus a traditional vitalist track. Different titles, different scopes, different disclosure rules. The WNF documents emphasis on accreditation/credentialing as a public reassurance mechanism will be cited as part of why governance had to eventually clarify what reassurance actually means when epistemic foundations are mixed. Prediction. Regulators will say, quote, the long-term mistake was treating accreditation plus licensure as proof of scientific content rather than as administrative proof of training consistency, unquote. 7. The legacy sentence likely to appear in 2086 retrospectives. Putting it all together, the most likely retrospective line in 60 years will sound like, quote, naturopathy was a licensed survival of sectarian medicine that blended preventative counseling and selective natural therapeutics with non-falsifiable vitalist theory and non-validated diagnostics. Its useful practices were assimilated into evidence-based preventative care, while its enduring controversy centered on epistemic disclosure, diagnostic expansion, and the institutional legitimacy granted to implausible modalities, unquote. That is, essentially, the reverse-engineered and final report synthesis re-expressed as future historiography and is strongly supported by WNF's own codification of vitalism/holism and the curricular inclusion of homeopathy and sectarian diagnostics. 8. What could change that forecast? If naturopathy in the next 20 to 30 years does any two of the following, the 2086 verdict becomes less severe. 1. Formally drops homeopathy from accreditation and scope. 2. Stops teaching/endorsing iridology/pulse tongue diagnosis as clinical diagnostics. 3. Hard codes evidence tier disclosures for labs/therapies with base rate/false positive education. 4. Decouples revenue from testing/supplements. Ban on direct sale or strict firewalls. 5. Aligns chronic Lyme claims with consensus infectious disease standards and RCT quality evidence. Absent reforms like these, the historical arc strongly favors the institutionalized epistemic conflation framing. Sidebar. And of course, I then asked the question, quote, certainly reforms 1 through 5 of Section 8 are only downstream manifestations of fundamental upstream causations. To change the forecast, list what those upstream fundamental wellspring changes would have to be and determine whether such would basically annul naturopathy, unquote. The answer, quote, what would truly change the 60-year forecast? Not drop the 5 practices, but ontology change, vitalism decausalized, epistemic constitution change, falsifiability and external concordance, identity change, stop defining against mainstream medicine, diagnostic philosophy change, and functionalist expansion, curricular purge of sectarian diagnostics/therapies, incentive change, break vertical integration. Would these annul naturopathy? Yes, in the sense that they would eliminate what makes naturopathy naturopathy. Remember, we're saying take out this bad stuff, and it's saying once the bad stuff is not there, all that's left is good stuff. After these upstream reforms, what remains would be lifestyle medicine, evidence-based nutrition, limited botanical pharmacology, coaching/behavior change support, all of which already exist in scientifically rigorous form outside naturopathy. So the reformed remainder is not naturopathy so much as an evidence-based practice profile, unquote. Close sidebar. And that's quite a bitter pill with great benefit to risk ratio. Thinking ahead, I am wondering what similar data collection processes and more powerful computational capabilities will yield in, say, 5 years. Next up is Part C, the final report. This has been the Naturocrit Podcast. Thank you for boldly listening.
The Naturocrit Podcast.
Talking about.